Today we're going to talk about circles and important properties of them to know. So some main ideas when it comes to circles. First, we have a constant curve that makes up the border of the shape. And we can see that in these circles here, that they curve at a consistent degree throughout the entire circle, which causes just the smoothest line you can make for it basically, which causes all these properties that we can look at for the circle and these known rules that we can talk about. So the second detail that we're going to be mentioning here is that we're going to be working with a center point. Now, if you never worked with circles in the past, it might be confusing. You might not necessarily know or have seen a center point before, but it is just what the name suggests. It's directly in the middle of that circle. So whether you go from this point to that edge, that edge, it's all going to be the same measurement. It's equidistant from all possible edges in that circle. So with that in mind, let's get into talking about some of these important properties. Here we have the radius. The radius goes from a center point of that circle to the edge. So that could be from the center point to this edge, that edge, that edge, that edge. It simply doesn't matter. All that it needs to go from is a center point to the edge of the circle. Now knowing that, we can talk about diameter, which is pretty similar to the radius. However, it goes not from the center to one edge. It rather goes from edge to edge, passing through the center point. That's an incredibly important detail that is needed. It needs to go through the center of the circle to be considered the diameter. So when you think about radius and diameter, you can think that radius goes from the center to an edge. Diameter is edge to edge, but it still deals with the center in the fact that it goes through it. So now these are important things that we can talk about. When it comes to radius, we know that it's the length from the center to the edge, but when we talk about diameter, since it's basically two radiuses, you can say that diameter is equal to radius times 2, or you could say radius plus radius if you wanted to. That doesn't necessarily matter, but it is an important fact just to know, because if you are only given the radius, you might need to find the diameter, and if you're not used to like drawing circles and working through problems, it might be a good detail just to understand that. Or rather, you might be given the diameter and you have to find the radius for a given problem. So just understanding the relationship between these two important ideas of circles is just very helpful, especially when it comes to word problems. Now, we're going to talk about circumference quick. And it is important to understand what diameter is, especially for circumference. So let's say this is a perfectly straight line, which it definitely is not. And we're going to call it diameter. When it comes to diameter, there is a very simple equation to find it. But when it comes to circumference, there's an important equation to find it. And it's very simple. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about what circumference is. Circumference is simply, you can think of it as perimeter. It's going to go all around the circle here. So you've worked with shapes that have been straight line before, like squares, rectangles, trapezoids, triangles, all that kind of thing, and you just kind of add up the sides. Now when it comes to a circle, there isn't a straight line, so we can't just, look at the measurements we're given and just do some simple addition to find it. Rather, we need to use the equation for circumference. So we're going to call circumference just C, just for clarification. And now we're going to take the diameter, which we're going to label D, and we're going to multiply it by something you might not have seen yet. It's called pi. Now I'm going to write the number right next to it, just for clarity purposes, especially if you haven't seen pi before. But the idea when it comes to pi is that this is just a known number that has been observed throughout finding these this information for circles, and it comes up just an absolute bunch of math. So it's important just to know these first three numbers when it comes to pi. But beyond that, if you have a calculator in front of you, there's a pi button that you can just press, and it has all the information for pi just loaded in. But we can just call it 3.14. So if you can remember that, that's all you'll probably ever need to know when it comes to pi. Your professors or teachers won't ask for any more information than that, or they'll give you pi in like a longer form, or you can just use the pi button on your calculator. But All that besides, all you need to do to find the circumference, you can think of it as the perimeter of a circle, is take the diameter, which will be probably given to you or you'll find, and multiply it by pi, which if you don't have the pi button, you can just substitute that for 3.14. So beyond that, you shouldn't need to know too much more when it comes to circumference. And the last important detail of circles that we have to talk about is area. Now, you've worked through area with just many different shapes probably up to this point, but circles are another different thing. So just like how we can think that the perimeter isn't as simple as it has been in the past, obviously the area of a circle, if you're looking at it, you're like, well, where do I find these squares, rectangles, and triangles on the inside, and how can I use that to find the area? The simple fact is you're not doing that. Well, we're not looking at any of that kind of stuff, nothing that you've known before. What you need to know for the area of a circle is the radius. And that's all you need to know. You might be like, wow, that doesn't necessarily make much sense. But when you look at the equation for area, you'll understand why. So you'll take pi, which we'll write 3.14 by it again, multiply it by the radius, but the radius is squared. Now that's important, and I'll write this in parentheses just so you know that it's very important to do radius squared first. So you might want to do radius squared times pi. That might be easier just so you don't accidentally mess up and do pi times radius and then square that number and then your area is just all messed up at that point. But yes, so if you haven't dealt with squaring, all that means is, and I'll write that up here, is radius times radius. That's all it is. So squared, if you're working with cubed, it'd be radius times radius times radius. But all we're going is a second degree here, which is just radius times radius. So with all that in mind, we do have some examples and some circles down here that we can work with to kind of get a better, thorough understanding of how these properties actually come into play. So let's say we're going to look for the diameter, and we're given, we're given a radius of 3. Okay, now that's not a lot of information necessarily. If you haven't worked with circles, it might be a little confusing, and that's understandable. But we know that one of the important details of diameter is that diameter is 2 times radius, or radius plus radius, or double radius, right? Because we know that radius goes from a center point to an edge, and diameter is from edge to edge through the center point, or 2 radiuses basically. So we'll draw that out. We'll draw the center point here, and we can say the radius goes from the center point to the edge, and we know that is 3 units long. But the diameter goes from an edge through the center point to another edge. So we got 1 radius here, another radius there, making it in total 6. So if you just want to do 2 times r, which is 2 times 3, and that's 6. We'll say units because we're measuring a length here. We're not talking about area where we might be working with square dimensions there. Now let's look at another example. Say we have a, we'll do this. A radius of 4, and we want to find the circumference. So what is the circumference? We might not necessarily know, but we can kind of start by just drawing out what we do know, and it's going to help us kind of piece together information. So the radius here, which is from a center point to the edge, is 4 units long. We know that. And then let's just talk about diameter here. Just kind of get the feel for the entire circle. We know that's going to be double radius. So 2 times radius, radius is 4. 2 times 4 is 8 units long. So we can say the diameter is that. Now when it comes to circumference, we know that equals diameter times pi. Okay, so here we're going to have diameter, which is 8, times pi, which is 3.14. Now let's see, we're going to have 24 plus 0.8 plus 0.32. And if my mental math is correct, that's going to be 25.12. And that's going to be the circumference, which is the perimeter. You can think of it like, we don't call it perimeter, we call it circumference, but it is the distance of that outstanding border to the circle. Okay, so let's look at one more example here. Maybe get my face out of the way. There we go. Okay, and now let's see here. We're going to be looking for area. It's unknown. And let's say we're giving a circle with diameter of 10. Okay, so we have to kind of work through this one just like the last problem. Let's draw out the diameter here. Yeah, that was not the best line there. Let's see. Okay, so imagine that's a straight line that goes directly from one edge through the center point to another edge. You can say that's 10. Now let's work from there to figure out what the radius is. We know the radius is half of the diameter because 2 times radius equals the diameter. So radius is a 5 here. And now we know that area, let's get green for you guys, area equals radius squared times pi, or pi times radius squared. And we know the radius is 5, and we're going to have to square that. And then we're going to multiply that by pi. So we're going to have 5 squared, which is 25, times pi, which is 3.14. And now we're going to take our calculator out because that is not necessarily the easiest math. So let's see. 25 times 3.14. That comes out to 78.5. And now since we're talking about area, just like in squares, rectangles, triangles, all of that, area is always in terms of squared units. So we can say that's units squared there. So yeah, I mean that's a lot of information to talk about, especially if you haven't dealt with circles before, but we're going to go over it nonetheless. So we have radius and diameter. Radius is the distance from a center point to the edge of the circle, and that's going to be equal all around the circle because we're talking about center point. Diameter is going to be 2 of those because it goes from one edge to the other, passing through the center point. So you can imagine that as just 2 radius stacked on top of each other. Circumference is what you would think about as the perimeter of a circle, and the formula for that is diameter, which is 2 of radiuses, times pi, which we can call 3.14. That's just a round of the number. And you multiply those two together, and that comes out to the circumference, or perimeter as you can think of it. And then we got one last concept here, which is the area. And we know that the area is pi, 3.14, times radius squared. And that might just be easier to look at as radius squared times pi. But also, if you haven't worked with squares and numbers, that's radius times radius makes radius squared. So the little exponent up here, that's what we call that number. That's just the amount of times that you multiplied a number by itself. Then we had some examples here, which I will leave on the screen for just a second if you wanted to re-look back at them. But if you work through these and you can actually understand by yourself of how to solve these problems, honestly you should be fine for just basic circle information. It doesn't really go beyond that. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We got a lot of videos coming up, so if you're around here in your curriculum, you're going to be seeing exactly what you need. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.